Hey, we're back here on Herb Talk, and we have a special guest. We are in for a treat, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us, all the way from New Zealand, we have Mr. Greg Macpherson. He's a pharmacist, a biotechnologist, a cellular health expert, and the author of Harnessing the Nine Hallmarks of Aging to Live Your Healthiest Life. Now, for more than a decade, Greg has been working in the biotechnology sector, especially focusing on the aging process at the cellular level. And this work led him to discover ways to harness the 9 identified scientific hallmarks of aging, which is the premise for his book, and addresses the natural aging process, how you age more favorably, and simple strategies to slow the aging process and build your functional health span. I like that term, Greg, health span. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Wendy. Great to be here.
I can see you've been busy, and you have quite the book here. I'm sure it's a very popular book. People want to know how they can stay young and look young and feel young, and you mentioned your PR agent Maureen sent over some wonderful talking points, and also mentioning, cellular stress and things like that, which we've mentioned here on the show, and how people can minimize all that. But so with all your expertise now in pharmacy, how did those insights kind of merge in reversing the aging process?
Yeah, Wendy, like you mentioned, I've spent the last decade in the biotechnology sector, and specifically looking at some of the reasons why we age and from a cellular level. I've spent probably 8 of those 10 years focusing on these little things called mitochondria, which are our cellular battery, and just like our iPhone battery, over time it declines. Mitochondria do a pretty good job for us and can last us up to 100 years, 120 years. But, they decline nonetheless, and it has quite an impact on our cells. And then more lately, we're focusing on just the whole the whole cellular reason for aging. So, it's not just our batteries. There's other elements within our cells that decline with age. And what's really exciting is that scientists and researchers out there in the world are starting to solve these problems and starting to see that we can slow the aging process down by modulating some of these mechanisms. And that means that we all get to benefit from that research. And the purpose of the book is really to go, hey, look, there's some really complex research out there, and let's translate it and make it accessible for the rest of us.
Okay, so I guess this research may include such things as telomeres and maybe stem cells?
Yeah, you got it. Yep, Wendy, that's right. There's actually 9 hallmarks of aging, and this is it really means 9 causes of aging, but each hallmark has been discovered and identified because when you make it worse, it speeds up aging, and when you make it better, it slows the aging process down. So what you mentioned just now, telomeres, is an indicator of the aging process in our cells. Telomeres are the caps of our chromosomes, or the caps of our DNA, and they shorten each time our cells divide, and also can be shortened by things like stress, like oxidative stress, but also even like the mental stress that we experience. And so by having strategies to slow or extend your telomeres, you're actually putting yourselves in a much more resilient position. And an example of that perhaps is that you or I had a twin, and that twin had shorter telomeres than you or I. If they had a heart attack, you both had a heart attack, we both had heart attacks on the same day, the twin with the shorter telomeres would have worse health outcomes. So the message there is care and look and love your telomeres.
Right. So the shorter the telomeres, the worse off you are. Right. So if we're testing DNA, now I just recently tested a new puppy we got because we got a couple of puppies from a litter, and they just looked totally different, and I was just wondering about it. So we just did some DNA testing, which revealed some really interesting things about the dog. So if we're doing DNA testing on ourselves, besides all those genetics, how does that, relate to our age? We hear about our chronological age and our birth age. How does that work?
Yeah, so again, some really smart scientists have discovered that we are like a clock on our DNA. So we've got two ages now. One is, as you mentioned, the chronological age, which is just sort of equates to the amount of time we've spent on the planet and how many times it's gone around the sun in doing so. But this biological age is actually reflecting how old our cells are acting. So, you or I could be, I'm in my early 50s, and chronologically, but I could have a biological age that could range from as much as 70 down to as little as 30. And that biological clock is pretty much determining how well we're aging. And most people are bang on, right? 50 for chronological and 50 for biological. But if you've got a health condition like diabetes or HIV, or you're perhaps not got the best diet, or perhaps not exercising as much, it can actually speed up the aging in your cells. So you might be 50 and have your cells aging like they're 70. And just what that means is that we all get, age is the biggest risk for getting health conditions. So if we speed up the age of our cells, then we're just accelerating that risk to get some of those conditions associated with old age. But the beauty of this particular clock is that we can reverse it. So, by doing good things like taking some of the supplements that I mentioned in the book and doing some of the activities I talk about in the book, then you can actually drive back that age. And that's what's so exciting. We're learning now how to turn back the clock, literally. So in your 50s, you might get to celebrate your 30th birthday again, or even your 40th.
Absolutely. I do believe that, because I've actually answered some online surveys about, your age, and just, this is the question they ask and what you're doing lifestyle-wise. They can kind of give you a picture, if you're older or younger than your chronological age. So, yeah, I do believe that. Everything you put in the body matters. Right, Greg?
You bet, Wendy. And what's neat about it is that you can start to measure what's going on. So, one of the challenges with anti-aging therapies, if you will, is that, you've got to do a clinical trial, and you've probably got to run it for 80 or 90 years to actually work out whether there's an outcome. But with these DNA measures, these clocks that we've got, we can actually start to see very quickly whether those therapies or treatments or supplements or lifestyle changes are actually affecting that clock. And so it just means that we can, look inside the cells and very quickly measure all the things that we're doing to help us and see if they're working, and if they're not, change things up.
Okay. I know you probably hear this question, because I hear this question a lot. What do you think the reason for the chronic health crisis in America is all about? Because we've got heart disease, cancer, diabetes, that kind of thing. My thinking is we have a lack of minerals. So how does this, factor in, cancer, dementia, all these things in the United States? How does that respond? What's that responsible for that you think is causing us? I know it's part of the aging process sometimes, because I hear this a lot from doctors. Oh, that's just normal, as you get older. I think it's common, but I don't think it's normal.
Yeah, I don't think we need to accept it either, Wendy. And I think to answer that, let's jump in a time machine and go back 100,000 years to what humans were living like back then, because that is, our lifestyles and our diets have only changed significantly in the last 50 to 100 years, even perhaps 30 to 50 years, really. And so if we look back 100,000 years ago, we were doing a couple of things. One, we were exercising a bunch because we had to go and chase down our food, or if we weren't, we were growing it and tending our crops. So we had a more physical existence in terms of exercise and so on. The other thing we were doing is we really struggled hard to find any sugar. What we were eating was quite, perhaps not sugar dense, and in our biology is really well adapted to low sugar. The other thing is occasionally, we quite regularly go hungry because food might have been a little bit difficult to get a hold of. And I'm sure during periods of human history like we're experiencing now, food was pretty easy to come by. But in ice ages, you might go a couple of days without finding some nutrient and sustenance. And the body actually benefits from being hungry from time to time because it triggers all sorts of nice housekeeping and processes inside our body. So, right now, most of us are pretty fortunate that we don't need to be hungry. There's an abundance of food. Not everybody, of course, but actually by having food available all the time, it's actually not suiting our biology. We need to enjoy food, which does things like help us build muscle and just provides nutrients for our body and the minerals you're talking about. But we also need times when we don't eat, because that just kicks off those housekeeping processes. So if we, and we probably 100,000 years ago, we're also probably having more of a plant-based diet. So all of those things coming together compared to what we're doing now is why potentially that we're seeing this epidemic, and it's not just America, it's all around the world. And then if we look at the blue zones, which are areas in the world, there's 5 of them, where people have remarkable longevity and remarkable health span, then you see that these people are doing kind of what in a modern way, what we were experiencing and doing 100,000 years ago. So we know from clues like that these things are accessible. We don't have to get some of these diseases, or we can defer them. But it's just let's look at our biology and look what we're well adapted to, and perhaps just start to practice that in our day-to-day life. And if we do that, it's an amazing. The effects are quite amazing.
Yeah, you actually hit on a point about fasting, because that is a way you cleanse the body, and it just gives a lot of those other organs we're using every day when we eat food a little vacation. And if we think about it, we have a mini fast, which is a way our body does purge toxins. It's when we don't eat, when we're sleeping. And so when you get up and you have the first meal of the day, it's called breakfast. It means breaking the fast.
Yeah, exactly right. And it just doesn't help occasionally to shift that out to lunchtime and just skip a breakfast from time to time. And it's really interesting, because it calorie restriction, which is what we're talking about when we do a little fasting, is actually so far it was one of the first interventions scientists worked out that actually cause life extension. And if we look at it scientifically, it's actually the body going, well, I don't know when the next bit of food's coming from, so I need to turn on some survival circuits to live a little bit longer, or to ensure that I do, because it doesn't know whether the food's coming in an hour or coming in 5 days. So it triggers all these longevity genes and cellular housekeeping processes. And what happens there is the body starts to break down some of the faulty cells that we've got, some of the faulty proteins we've got, gets a little bit of energy from it. But the benefit is it's starting to recycle things, and when we eat again, then everything gets built again nice and shiny and new.
Well, you mentioned sugar. I've often told my audience that, one candy bar will shut off your immune system for about 8 hours. So watch the sugar. So how important do you think it is on a cellular level to avoid sugar? What does that do to the body when you get too much sugar?
It's a great question, and I remember I came to America when I was 21 for an internship to go and visit some hospitals and pharmacies in California, and it's one of the flights that I took, I sat next to a doctor, and he said to me, he was reading an article, and he said to me, sugar is going to be the next nicotine, it's the next cigarette, it's just, and this was 30 years ago, and sugar is like, it's just a little as good, and it's pure energy. But when we have too much and we do it for too long, the body just gets overloaded. It's just not designed for it. It's like, if you imagine having a chocolate cake, and it's a beautiful, rich one, and you get halfway through and your body just goes, stop, I can't eat any more. Well, and you feel a bit icky. Yeah. So when you're overdosed on sugar, your cells are just screaming like, stop. And it puts oxidative stress on your cells. It's just simply not good for you. So you get a little short-term benefit from it. And we're all programmed to do it, because 100,000 years ago, sugar was, that was a luxury, and it was a, it got you through. But nowadays we just don't need it. And the brain doesn't help us, because it wants it. But if you can avoid it, then please do.
Right. Well, how do you feel about honey as opposed to sugar?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one. I think molecularly, sugar is sugar, and honey is essentially a very sweet, sugary type product. So I would I still use a little honey when I have my lemon honey drinks. But I just do it in moderation.
Right.
Because there are health benefits with honey as well, of course.
Oh, I know. And I have a family member that likes to drink mead. Man, that's so sweet.
It is so sweet.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you're about your book, which is Harnessing the Nine Hallmarks of Aging. So your book covers these 9 hallmarks, but which would you say is the most important one out of all those 9?
Yeah, so the first 3 hallmarks relate to your DNA, and your DNA is, back at pharmacy school, it was pretty much just described as the instruction set for your cells. But over the last 30 years, we've started to understand that it's this dynamic sensing, I guess, molecule which is constantly reading the environment. It's constantly sort of unfurling and helping us manufacture molecules that we need in our cells. And you really want to care and nurture your DNA. It's like if you think about a 3D printer, that new technology, and you think about putting that 3D printer into your oven and whacking it up to 300 degrees, that's what your DNA is like. Your DNA is getting damaged from UV and pollution and our diet and then internal oxidative stress. And our DNA breaks 50 to 100,000 times per day per cell, which is an incredible number.
Right.
And we've got amazing repair and maintenance molecules that just constantly monitor our DNA, identify when there's a break that has occurred, get it fixed. And but if you over our lifetime, your DNA starts to decline in function. You just can't keep breaking something and get it repaired, and it always is perfect. So if you just care and nurture your DNA and look after it, and you do that from your 30s, then you're going to look after it. And a great way to think about it is, how people put sunscreen on their face, and it's literally the best anti-aging thing you can do for your skin. And so that's actually putting a shield and preventing UV damage to your DNA. And so if you think about how to do that for your cells, that's by doing exercise. It's about eating well and recycling your DNA. And then there's a new supplement, which in the process of writing the book I discovered, called Tuhoba or hobamine. And this is a extract from Himalayan buckwheat. It's a remarkable molecule. And what it does is it's almost like sunscreen for your cells and sunscreen for your DNA. It protects it from free radical damage, and it does it in a way which is quite new. It doesn't interfere with healthy free radicals, because we do need healthy free radicals. The body needs them to communicate, and it uses it just generally to have healthy cells. So yeah, number 1, look after your DNA.
Right. So I guess other than the sun, lack of exercise, and diet, was there anything else we need to worry about regarding damaging DNA?
I think it's really interesting, but moderating our stress, right? So stress so stress in its own right is not bad, right? Everybody's got stress in their world, and your biggest problem is always going to be your biggest problem. So really what it's about is developing strategies or learning strategies to moderate that stress. So for some people that's mindfulness, some people it's getting out and active relaxing, surfing, fishing, whatever. But it's really important that if you find that you are not coping with stress, that you take steps and learn ways and strategies to do it, because that stress manifests, and it's weird, but it does, in shorter telomeres, and that affects your health. So being stressed, mentally stressed, does impact your body.
Right. I read a report where your food, your diet, if you got a really kind of not so great diet and you go to a clean organic one, it will change your DNA in 6 days.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that's a lot of power that people have, that they can exercise just with that. And the other thing that a lot of these people that plan cities and zones, and they have all this green space, they realize they just can't have a few trees planted along the streets in your city centers. They have to have lawns and park benches, and people need to go at lunch and decompress in these green space areas, because it affects them physically and emotionally, because it's a lot of concrete stressful.
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. I experienced that myself in second year at university, and lived in a flat that was just concrete, and I got depressed, and it was like I couldn't quite figure out what was going on, and then I live in a small town, so I got back to my small town and got out and into the wilderness, so to speak, and it sorted itself out. So I don't know quite how it works, but absolutely spending some time in nature is so good for you.
Well, since we're in this, age of COVID virus and the vaccines that they're issuing and promoting, what is your take on how do you think vaccines damage DNA?
It's a great question, Wendy, and I've looked into it, and I could be wrong, but just based on the mechanism of the vaccine, it shouldn't interfere with your DNA. It certainly, what it's doing is it's essentially, if we think about how our body makes proteins, the mRNA goes and reads the DNA, gets the code from there, and then it takes it over to the protein manufacturing machinery, and that converts that code into proteins. So this vaccine is essentially shortcutting that process and directly coding the protein manufacturing machinery in our cells to manufacture the spike protein. So that in itself shouldn't affect our DNA, but and then the immune system then reacts to it, to that protein as perhaps it would if it experienced the virus in the body. But it's really early days, and so what I've got more interested in is actually how do we decrease the effects of the virus on the body. And so that's where one of the hallmarks of aging is something called cellular senescence. And senescent cells are cells in our bodies that have stopped dividing. And that we have them because the body uses that process. If a cell gets cancer, for example, the DNA slams on the handbrakes and stops that cell dividing again. We've got specific tumor suppressing proteins in our DNA, and when it recognizes things are going wrong, it puts the handbrake on. Or it could be that the cell stops dividing because it's stopped doing something useful. For example, if we get a wound and we've got some scar healing happening, when that healing stopped, we want to stop the cells from continuing the healing process, so the body again slams on the brakes and stops those cells from dividing. And so what happens with senescent cells is that they're not of use to us anymore, and so they secrete like inflammatory molecules called cytokines, and those molecules attract our immune system to come. It's like sort of waving, the senescent cells waving to the immune system saying, come over here and remove me, which is what the immune system does. But as we get older, the immune system doesn't keep up, and we build up senescent cells. And what researchers have discovered is that the reason older adults are reacting so poorly to COVID is because of the number of senescent cells in their bodies. And Mayo Clinic is doing research now saying, look, if we remove those senescent cells, what happens? And it turns out in mouse models that when you remove the senescent cells from older mice, that when they're exposed to the virus, they respond the same way as a younger person would to the virus. So you don't get that awful reaction that's putting a lot of people in hospital. So the next process is to evaluate that in humans, and Mayo Clinic is doing that right now. But I'm pretty confident that if we do remove those senescent cells from our body, that this will reduce the risk of COVID and the side effects.
Well, Greg, we got about a minute and a half. Let us, our audience, know how they can find your wonderful book, Harnessing the Nine Hallmarks of Aging. Where can they go get your book?
Thanks, Wendy. So if they visit harnessingthenine-hallmarks-of-aging.com, they'll find it there. The book itself is on Amazon as well, so they can download a copy or get one printed. It's just as a short summary of the book, it's essentially explaining what's happening to ourselves as we age and giving us strategies in our 30s, 40s and 50s to just age smarter than previous generations. And in their book, we talk about certain molecules and supplements that are available to us all right now that we can take and just simply age better.
Absolutely. Gracefully aging, right?
You bet.
Awesome. Well, you've been a delightful guest, and don't forget, audience, you can get Harnessing the Nine Hallmarks of Aging at .com or at Amazon and probably some of your other bookstores. Just ask around and go get this book and age gracefully out there. You've been a delightful guest, Greg. I wish you the best of success in your additional pursuits. I know you got probably some on the plate, so I don't want to keep you longer because I know it's a time difference in New Zealand, but thank you for joining us here on Herb Talk Live.
Thanks so much, Wendy. I appreciate talking with you.
All right, take care now.
Take care.
Bye. All right, Greg, what a great guest. He was very informative, and I hope you guys learned a lot.